Part 4. Let's do this. Okay, so in part 4 here, we're going to talk about Adolf Hitler. And Hitler is going to be the dictator of Germany, actually born in Austria in 1889 on April the 20th. And yes, I know, April the 20th, and there's always students who ask, like, oh, is that why the stoners celebrate 420? No, they celebrate 420 because they're stoners and they don't know anything about anything. It doesn't mean anything at all. 420 means nothing except Hitler's birthday. So tell them this. Next time somebody's like, oh, 420, dude, be like, hey, you're lighting a candle on Hitler's birthday cake, bro. Don't do it. Why do you think they call it dope? For reals. All right, soapbox over. Let's talk about Hitler. Anyway, he's born in Austria, in a little town called Linz, and not a very good student, beaten by his father, who is an alcoholic. He's very close to his mother, who is related to his father, because this is the time period we are talking about. And basically, that is her uncle. And if you ever watch the movie Hitler, the Rise of Evil, she actually calls him uncle. And he says, like, the boy's no good. This is punishment for me marrying my niece. It wasn't even his first marriage. The dad, Alois, was he was previously married. I guess after one marriage didn't work out, he was like, better marry my niece. So there's that. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about a very popular misconception about Hitler that people always want to throw out, and that is that he was Jewish. There's no evidence for that, and let me explain to you why. His dad is Alois, right? So Alois and his niece Clara create little baby Adolf. I'm not very good at writing with that. See, this is, if you want someone who is good handwriting, you can go watch Khan Academy. So that's Alois. Alois is the son of Hitler's grandma, whose name I don't recall off the top of my head, and I'm not going to worry about it. And grandma was impregnated by a man, well, clearly a man, right? But we don't know who. It was a mystery. So in other words, he was illegitimate. Well, this begs the question. If we don't know who Grandpa is, who could it be? Could it be a person who is Jewish? That rumor comes from the British, who during World War II throw it out there. Hitler being super racist, of course, that's his worst fear in the whole world. And Hitler was obsessed with the idea that he might be Jewish. So you can only imagine how much that must have bothered him. His grandmother had worked in the house of a Jewish businessman. So that businessman had a younger son. As we know from McKay's explicit chapter 24, sometimes servants were taken advantage of. So perhaps she was the victim of either consensual or non-consensual baby making with the son or the dad of the Jewish household, and then she illegitimately bore Alois. What is important is that it happens. It's also important there's no evidence he was Jewish. So we don't know how she got pregnant. Well, we could probably figure that part out. But we don't know who the daddy was. So let's not jump to conclusions and assume he was Jewish. Anyway, Grandma's maiden name was Schicklgruber, by the way. This is a fun little trivia question, which meant that Alois's name was Schicklgruber. Remember, that's Adolf's dad. So if Grandma had not ended up marrying a guy whose last name was... Oh, it's really hard to write with these things. I feel like a child. Little baby trying to write. Heidler. But then when they are copying it down on Alois's, because they're making him legally Heidler's son, they write down Hitler instead, and they mess it up. If it were not for that clerical error, and also the fact that Grandma ended up marrying that guy, we could be hearing chants of Heil Schicklgruber in those old Nazi films, which would be funnier because it's a ridiculous name. Anyway, Hitler flits about for a while. He wants to become an artist. He really saw himself as this poetic soul. After his dad dies, he moves to Vienna, the capital of Austria, and applies for art school. He's rejected, and I put in a couple of Hitler's paintings here. On the right, you've got a city scene. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not bad, but it's not great. What about that? It's flowers. Okay. Flowers. Oh, it's like a lake scene. What about a dog? Can he do a dog? Boom! He did a dog. Now, having said all this, none of it is that impressive. Actually, the dog is full on, like a little bit not great. But none of it's that impressive. He got rejected. So then he went around trying to use his dad's pension from after he died. He received a little bit of money every month, as did his mother. And he would go to plays and operas in the evening, walking around with a cane in Vienna. And then he decides, I want to be an architect. Applies for that. Loses once more. Doesn't get accepted. Then, poofity poof, World War I is declared. So Hitler goes into the army. Doesn't go into the Austrian army. Should be noted. He draft dodges the Austrian army and goes across the border to Germany and enlists there. He actually gets in trouble for it, but then they ultimately decide, hey, he ended up on the right side, so we really can't complain too much. So he enlists in that army. Hitler didn't like the idea of the Austrian army because he felt like there were too many different races there in Austria, and that it did not have the purity that Germany had. So there he is. He hasn't adopted his signature look yet, where he's going to shave that mustache down. But he was supposedly a fairly good soldier, by all accounts. He was well known for his bravery. He would volunteer to bring messages across the trenches on the Western Front. He fought the entire war. He never made it past corporal because, and get this is irony alert, people didn't think he had much leadership potential. So there's that. After the war, he decides that he is going to investigate some things for the army. Actually, the army ordered him to do this. They asked him to go in and check out a political party. And the political party was the German Workers' Party. And it was headed by a guy named Anton Drexler. And Hitler went to a couple of these meetings. His goal was to find out whether or not this party was dangerous, so if they were a threat to national security. What Hitler really finds out is, no, but they're kind of crazy racist people, and I like that. So Hitler, after he gets laid off from the army, because remember, the Treaty of Versailles limits the number of men in the German army to 100,000. So Hitler and numerous other former troops are just sacked, basically, left unemployed. Hitler makes a decision. He's going to go into politics. And whilst there, he says, hey, I'm going to go to this German Workers' Party and I'm going to start speaking. He does. He gains a following. Eventually, he's able to kind of bully his way into becoming the leader of it. He adds a couple of words there. National Socialist German Workers' Party. The initials would be National Socialist German, because remember, other languages, sometimes the different letters, so that's Deutsche Workers' Party, National Socialist Deutsche Arbeiterpartei. If somebody actually knows German, I just like to point out my pronunciation is not very good, but that's what it means. And Hitler immediately starts with the racial nonsense. He believes the Aryans are a master race. He says, we are descended from the purest of whites here in Germany. That is why we have such handsome people. That is why we have such talented people. He points out all the great advances in European civilization and says, those were German. Those guys were German. He says, like, oh, what about Mozart? German. What about Beethoven? German. There are other examples, but those are the two that come to mind. And I know he was really into opera and just general chamber music, so he probably would have used those examples. And he said the further we've gotten away from our ideal, the worse we're off. Look at Germany now. We're getting away. We're allowing these other races to bring us down. Now, pause. I'm not saying this. This is Hitler saying this. But he believes that other races, and in there he included Jews, were races that were trying to undermine the purity of the Aryans. And he says, basically, you should not be breeding with them. You should not be marrying them, dating them, doing whatever else with them. You should not be doing that. He tries to take over the government in 1923, fails. It's called the beer hall Putsch. He goes to a beer hall, of all places, which is not as crazy as it sounds because a lot of meetings back then of the political nature were held in large places, and the beer hall was a public gathering place. It's a place that you would meet. He jumps up on a table, fires a gun into the air, and says, the National Socialist Revolution has begun. It has not begun. He fails, and he ends up thrown in prison. But at his trial, he manages to make a spectacle of himself, partially due to a judge that was a little sympathetic towards Hitler's plight. And he says a lot of things that get the attention of the national media. So he goes from being this obscure little racist guy from southern Germany, specifically from Munich, to a nationwide figure. And whilst he's in jail, he writes this book. It's Landsberg Prison, if you want to be exact, but I'm just simplifying. He writes this book called Mein Kampf, and it means my struggle. And he says, it's my struggle against lies, stupidity, and cowardice. And his editor convinces him to shorten it to just my struggle, which is probably wise. It's not very good, in case you're wondering about, should I go read it? There's a certain morbid curiosity, I'm sure, but ultimately, it is just straight up, I do not like other races for 200 and some odd pages. There are interesting parts. He talks about war propaganda in, I believe, chapter 7 of the first book. It's over 2 books. And that is probably worth reading if you're interested in seeing the way that Hitler viewed propaganda. But aside from that, he fictionalizes his autobiography of when he's a young man. He recasts himself as the hero and everything, and he's so smart and he's so brilliant. And then at the end of it all, he sets out his goals for how he's going to run the country, which seemed pretty audacious at the time. People were like, dude, you're straight up in prison, yo. Why are you writing a book about what you're going to do? But he believed in himself. And he believed that if he got his message out there, he'd attract the right people. He will, but not really until the Great Depression hits. And I'll talk about that in the second part of this.